What's up, guys? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of our videos. Also, make sure you follow us all over social media so you don't miss any of our content or show announcements. This game pretty quickly took on a simple dynamic. You have two elite defenses, right? And especially with Golden State playing at home, you're going to get an exceptionally good effort. And in a desperation type of situation too, right? We've talked before after the Steph Curry hamstring injury, the Warriors basically have to get one of these two games at home because if they do, that puts a Game 6 guaranteed on the calendar. And a Game 6 is still more than a full week from now. That is on May 18th. And so there's a real opportunity there for Steph to potentially get back and have a chance to play at the tail end of this series. Now, as we know, that's a tricky hamstring injury. It might not even matter. But for any hope that the Warriors have to advance in this postseason run, it was going to depend on them getting one of these two games at home. So you're expecting a certain type of super intense effort. And so it pretty much settled down into a shot creation contest between Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards and the new iteration of the Warriors without Steph. We talked last night about how Steve Kerr got into the idea of how you have to basically play a completely different brand of basketball in order to make the situation work when you lose your star. One of the things that's interesting about the Warriors roster construction is it's built on a lot of defensive-minded athletes that are good read and react players that operate well in the inverted spacing that Steph provides, meaning as Steph is coming off of action and he's bringing multiple players out, often bringing a big man out in a ball screen coverage, there are these 4-on-3s or 3-on-2s, quick advantage situations that break down on the back line. And on the back line, it becomes very much a make decisions, athletes, it's a very different game than spacing the floor for a rim pressuring forward, right? Like if you're playing with Luka or Giannis or LeBron, it's like you need shooting. But the Warriors, they emphasize more versatile athletes that can work with the advantages that Steph creates on the perimeter to have success on the interior. And so Steve Kerr essentially had to rebuild a basketball team on the fly. And so he used Game 2 as a launching ground. And what did we get? We got a high dose of Jonathan Kuminga. We talked after Game 2 about how Jimmy Butler would likely be much more aggressive at home. We got a much more aggressive version of Jimmy Butler tonight. He went for 26 shot attempts in this game. And then the same steady diet of Buddy Hield running off of screening action. So essentially it turned into this new dynamic of the Warriors versus the same old Minnesota Timberwolves with Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle. And for the first 2.5 quarters, the Warriors were really controlling things. Ant was in a pretty big funk. Golden State's defense, as I mentioned earlier, in their last 34 games this season, so a sample size of almost a half of the season, they had the number one defensive rating in basketball. I was thinking about this earlier, I think this is the best defense that Ant has played in his time in the NBA. They are not as good at the rim in terms of rim protection as Dallas was, but I think they're much faster on the perimeter, much smarter, more well-coached. I think they're just a more dynamic defense overall, and it's not exactly a slump in Draymond Green that you have at the basket or a slouch or whatever you want to call it. Draymond's, one of the better rim-protecting smaller bigs that we have in the league, right? And one of the things the Warriors have done with Ant that's caused some problems for him is ball pressure. They're picking him up and making him uncomfortable in his kind of dance with the basketball situations, and it's forcing him to drive earlier in the schedule than he wants to. And then in those situations, they keep throwing bodies at him. He's over penetrating and trying to find kick out opportunities while he's kind of indecisive in the lane. He's slaloming through 2 or 3 guys at the basket, trying to find a finishing angle to finish, and he's smoking layups. He just was struggling for really the first 2.5 games of this series, but into the second quarter tonight. And Julius Randle was struggling a little bit too tonight. I was confused a little bit with his strategy because he kept just trying to attack Draymond Green one-on-one. And I get it if it's late in the shot clock and you got tossed a grenade with 5 seconds left and you have to create something. But with the way that you should look to approach on offense, for the first 15 seconds of the shot clock, you need to be hunting easier opportunities, a better matchup, an advantage you can create in action, some sort of easier opportunity before you rely on ISOing their best defender. if you repeatedly attack their best defender, you're just making life harder on you than it needs to be. And so Julius was struggling a little bit. And then with the Warriors, they were getting great production. Jimmy was fantastic tonight, scoring the basketball. We got that aggression from him. Jonathan Kuminga goes for 30 points. The Warriors actually won his minutes tonight. Buddy Hield early in the second half gets going, starts hitting some threes. And so the Warriors built a little bit of margin. I think they ended up going up by as much as 7. I'll pull up the largest lead. But I think they won. Yeah, the largest lead was 7 for the Warriors in that early third quarter stretch. But right around that time, a couple things started to go Minnesota's way. Ant got a couple of decent catch and shoot looks in off-ball situations. We talked a little bit about this in the Lakers series, the idea of Ant being really good attacking closeouts off of Julius Randle post-ups. Ant got a little bit more rhythm with his jump shot. Julius Randle started to have a little bit of success against Draymond in large part because Draymond got into some foul trouble, and then Draymond had to be a little bit more conservative with his approach. So he was like more gambling on Julius further out from the basket, trying to like disrupt him before he even got into his attack, because he knows once he gets into his attack, there's not much contact that he can get away with there. And so all of a sudden these cracks started to open up, and Ant starts hitting even some tough pull-up threes. I was talking with Jackson before the show, like, Jackson, obviously, Jackson's a Celtics fan, but he also roots for the Warriors. And he was like, we were talking just about what it was like for me as a Lakers fan, watching Ant repeatedly in these early fourth quarter stretches just hit these crazy difficult pull-up threes. And it's like, you're in a groove, you're playing hard, your defense is locked in, and it just doesn't matter, because when Ant goes into that step back move, there's really nothing you can do but just hope he misses. And it's just such a remarkable piece of athleticism to be able to separate from a defender, a great defender, late in the clock, and then set your base and elevate up over the top of a great contest, sometimes a double team, and rise up and knock down a shot like that. And all of a sudden it just was cooking. And it gets a huge driving dunk on Kevon Looney, another amazing dunk to add to Anthony Edwards' highlight reel of playoff dunks in his career. Started in general to find some more seams right at the front of the rim where he was getting cleaner finishing angles. And all of a sudden, what looked like a puzzle that Ant was struggling to solve, he finishes with 36 points in this game. And that was kind of my takeaway when we were in that mid-third quarter stretch. I'm thinking, okay, this is the best defense that Ant has ever played in his career. They're kind of kicking his butt a little bit. We talked about this after game 1. Let's see if Ant can figure it out. Like, is this going to be like the Dallas series where it didn't really seem like he ever made any headway? Or is he going to make some headway? And, like, here's the thing. There's no doubt that not having Steph Curry out there changes the dynamic of the game. And I'm not trying to sit there and pretend like this is the most challenging win of Anthony Edwards' career. It's not. But this is a very good defense, and he did start to find some ways that he could get going. Off-ball and catch-and-shoot situations, driving closeouts, got a little bit more comfortable and in a rhythm as a pull-up shooter, and starting to find those driving angles closer to the basket. I think there's even more room for improvement with him. He gets a little bit rushed going downhill to where there's not a lot of change of pace. We talked about this on Playback a couple nights ago, but Anthony Edwards is taking about half as many mid-range jump shots as he did in last year's postseason run. He just was a little bit more willing to work in the middle of the floor at that point. And I think there's still growth that Ant can, Ant can benefit from in the form of just being more comfortable operating at a slower pace or with change of pace in the middle of the floor and making better use of that mid-range jump shot. I think there's a lot of opportunity for him to improve, but the indomitable scoring talent was on display in that second half. It just didn't matter that he's a little one-dimensional at this point in time, or that he still isn't reading the floor as great as he could potentially. 36 points against the best defense in the NBA, in my opinion. And then Julius Randle, he's been sneaky fantastic this entire postseason run. I didn't like his game 1 of this series, but for the most part in the Lakers series and the most part in this series, he's consistently been very comfortable operating out of the mid post and out of the low post. He's been playmaking at an extremely high level, goes for a triple-double tonight, 24, 10, and 12. His passing out of the mid to high post has been a consistent kind of like underrated part of his game. He's actually one of the better like kind of entry points for Minnesota to use, just because at this point he's more willing to hunt those advantages than Ant is. And again, Ant will figure that stuff out in time. But at the end of the game, it was funny because Jackson and I were talking, like, the Warriors did everything tonight that they could have done. You get 2 30-point performances out of Like if you would have told me before this game that you're going to get 33 out of Jimmy and 30 out of Jonathan Kuminga, you're thinking a Warriors win, right? But it just was that much better for Ant and Julius. They were able to get the job done in that second half. And here's the thing, like, I think the Warriors have exposed some obvious flaws in this Minnesota attack on both ends of the floor in terms of their attentiveness to ball and player movement, in terms of their vulnerability to the offensive glass when they're in rotation, in terms of just their ability to handle ball pressure and physicality in a better defensive construct than what they've attacked in some of these playoff series. But you just need to get through this series. And then maybe if you're lucky, Denver beats Oklahoma City, and that's a team that you've had their number for the last 2 years now. So, like, the finals are there. There's a pathway there for Minnesota to get through this and to get all the way to the finals. And I think they match up pretty well with the teams coming out of the Eastern Conference. And, I was actually thinking about this the other day. I think you could talk me into all 8 teams in this postseason run being a legitimate championship contender. Indiana, obviously had a rough game 3. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they beat Cleveland, beat whoever came out of the Knicks-Celtics series, and then beat whoever came out of the West. That's certainly a possibility. I could see Denver winning the West. I could see OKC still coming back and win the series. I could see Boston repeating. I could see Cleveland getting, just wiping the floor with Indiana for the next 3 games and then running into a Celtics team that's still in a little bit of a funk and getting it done. Like, it feels wide open at this point. And there is a legitimate pathway for Minnesota to work through here. You get a really good opportunity to finish this series off against a Warriors team that's missing their best player. You have a potentially great matchup waiting for you with the team leading 2-1 in the next round in Denver, a team that you've had their number consistently. And then I can't think of a type of team that I'd like to see more against a Boston. I think after today we could all agree that Boston is still probably the favorite to win the East. And Minnesota would just be such a fun matchup in that series with their ability to switch and contain. Basically, Minnesota is a much, much better version of Orlando. And we saw what Orlando was able to do at times against the Celtics. So super, super interesting series. On the Warriors front, a couple of specific things. This was the game that I had kind of marked as the best chance they had to steal one. But it was very unlikely you were going to get both. You really just need to get one, so it's just all eyes turned to Monday night now. And you got to figure out a way to get that particular game. And again, as you've proven, you can make this offense uncomfortable. You can slow them down. Minnesota, to their credit, kind of got going in that second half. They had 62 points. That goes to show you how important it is for your best player to produce when you get into these settings. But this is going to be a fun series, and it's going to come down to Game 4. Whoever wins Game 4 is going to be in a really good position moving forward. If the Warriors win, then they got Steph coming back and a good chance to win the series. And if Minnesota wins, they're going home 3-1 and probably closing this thing out in 5.